Welcome back. In this video, we are going to use if statements, and we are going to finally make use of what we've learned so far. For example, the comparison operators, which are very useful when it comes to if statements. So we had this comparison operator where we said 5 equal 3, and then if that was true, we can now go ahead and execute something. So now let's go ahead and create an if statement here. And before we do so, I'm going to create a little variable called height person1, and it's going to be something like 170, and then maybe height should be written correctly, and then I have another one, height person2, should be something like 189. All right, so these are centimeters for those of you who aren't aware of what I'm talking about. So 170 centimeters and 189 centimeters. I think that's something like 5'7" or 5'8" or something like that. And then this should be 6'3" in terms of feet and inches. All right, so these are the two height person 1 and height person 2. So we have two people, and we want to execute something based on a condition. So if person 1 is taller than person 2, then we're going to use raw force in order to beat it. Let's say we have a fight between two people, and now we have to decide what kind of technique we want them to use. So let's say our fighter is 170 and the opponent is 189. So what shall we do? Shall we either use raw force or shall we use technique? Of course, a combination of both will be useful, but then we're going to check if height person 1 is greater than height person 2. I simply want to print something like use raw force. All right, so let's say, or let's assume that if someone is taller, then he's also going to be stronger because he's going to have more weight, and that is going to be very useful in a one-on-one fight. But now, if we execute this line of code, we will see that pretty much nothing will happen because the condition isn't met. So we have this condition of height person 1 shall be greater than height person 2. But if we look at the values, we will see that that is not true because 170 isn't higher than 189. So we can see we get nothing here printed. So now let's say the other way around. What shall happen if height person 1 is less than height person 2? Well, that's something that we can use with an else statement. Okay, so in this case, it's either if or else. So if this condition is met, then execute the code that is within those curly brackets. And if the condition is not met, then run the else block, which means run the code which is within those curly brackets. So here I'm just going to say use technique. All right, so now let's run this again and see if anything will be printed whatsoever. And we can see it says use technique. So because our person 1 was smaller than the other one, we advise him to use his best techniques instead of trying to apply raw force when fighting one-on-one, because we're one hell of a coach and want only the best for our fighter. But what shall happen if they are both the same size? So let's say we have the situation where both are actually the same size. Is there any special advice that we can give our fighter? Even though in this example it's rather weird to have such a situation, but let's just say we have this other condition. So what you can do is you can have an else if. So there are 3 different types of checks. So the if check, then the else if check, and then finally the else, which is not really a check, but which is a code that will be executed as a default if none of the above are true. So what does that even mean? Well, let's say we have an else if in between here. So let me show you. So we have an else if again with a condition. So here I'm gonna say that those two have the same height. So equal. All right. So we had this first condition here, which was height person 1 greater than height person 2. Then we had the second condition here, which was height person 1 is equal to height person 2 when it comes to his size. And then we can execute some code if that condition is met in here. So let's just say something like use your power technique 1337, something like that. So the fighter has a power technique and it's very useful against people who are the same height as he is. So he should use that technique. But then we have this else block, which will be executed if none of the above are true. So if neither this if statement or this condition here is true, nor this condition here is true, then the else block will be executed. So then the text use technique will be executed instead. Now the cool thing is, you can have as many else ifs as you want. So we could go ahead and check if the height of person 1 is greater than 150 and execute some code. Then check if what should happen if the person is smaller than 140, or all kinds of combinations that we can think of. Even though we have to be careful that certain conditions don't overlap with each other, because if they overlap, then one of them will be useless. Okay, so what we have here, if we execute this, let's say when the person 1 and person 2 are both 170, then it should display use your power technique 1337. So there we are, it says use your power technique 1337. So let's say the person 2 is smaller than the person 1, then it should say use raw force. So there we are, use your raw force. All right, and what you see here, so this whole if, else if stuff is a control flow, and we're using if statements here. Now a little challenge for you. Please go ahead and create an if, else if, else if, else block where the first age check will be greater or equal 21. And if that's the case, then it should write something like, or print something like, you may drink in the US. Then else if the age is greater or equal than 18, then you may vote. And if somebody is older than 16, you may drive. And then finally, if none of the above is true, then it should print something like you were too young. So try to use this kind of structure to print those different statements based on a variable called age that you of course also need to create. So go ahead and try that. All right, so I hope you paused the video. So I'm going to create this variable called age, and actually I'm not going to change it, so I could go ahead and use a val here. So the variable will be age, and then I use an if statement here. If age was greater or equal 21, then I want to print something saying now you may drink in the US, because in other countries you may drink before that, right? If you do that, then in our case, of course, this will not be printed because age is not greater than 21. But now let's have another check. So else if the age is greater or equal 18. So what shall be printed if that's the case? Well, let's print something like you may vote now. All right, print ln, you may vote now. And then we have another check, age greater or equal 16. And then in the US, you may drive. So print ln, you may drive now. Of course, you need a license for that, but at least you can make the license or do the license at this point, and then you can use it. And then finally, we have an else block, which will be executed if none of the above is true, which means if the person is 15 or younger, then it should say something like, you're too young to do whatever. All right. So if we run this, you probably already guessed it, it will print you may drive now because our age is 17. All right, so let's run this. And there we are. So it says you may drive now. Now, if the age is, let's say 31, as I am, you can see it says now you may drink in the US. All right, so of course I can do all of the others information as well. So I also may vote, I also may drive now, and so forth. Of course, I could adjust the print statements here accordingly, but this is the latest thing, so to speak, that I can do due to my age. All right. So we have this if else block that we can use in order to execute stuff when certain conditions are met. Now, by the way, a thing that you can also do if you have a very basic if statement. So let's say you only have one line of code that follows a condition. So age is greater equal 30. Then you can just go ahead and do or add the text in the next line. You're over 30. All right, so that's something that you can, of course, also do directly. So just one line of code without having these extra curly brackets around it. So if you see anything like that, that's what it does. But you have to be careful, because in the next line, so if I add something like this in the next line, this line will not be part of this if statement. So it will be executed either way. So be careful here. Alrighty, so these are the if statements, and in the next video we are going to look at when, because you might see already that it's complaining. So it says cascade if should be replaced with when. So let's do that in the next video. So see you there.